In Supercars, there are very few examples of a team turning things around and returning to glory. We have more examples of teams getting things lined up for the first time, so I'll use these examples to theorise how Walkinshaw Andretti United might become regular frontrunners again. To begin with, let's talk about what we're dealing with here. Walkinshaw Andretti United was once known as the Holden Racing Team until a few years ago. 15 years before that, they were the benchmark team like TripleEight are these days. A gradual fall from glory left them without their namesake sponsor, factory team status, and only a handful of team members who were there when HRT dominated. The team is in a transition period, trying to find what it needs to be winners again. It is now part owned by two internationally acclaimed team owners, and both current drivers will be replaced for 2020. Let's look at other examples of teams that have made changes and become frontrunners. The most obvious recent example is DJR Team Penske, which was also partially bought out by an international racing boss. They began with a star driver, switched to a young gun with more recent supercar experience, expanded to accommodate a recent race winner, and then replaced the young gun with a faster and more successful one. Then boom, they were winning races and have been very impressive for a few years now. WOW have done some of this. When they knew that they would be going through a difficult transition, they swapped their most successful driver for DJR Team Penske's first young gun, then got themselves some new team owners. To successfully emulate Penske, WOW would need to get a driver who has won races this season, and then get themselves a more successful and faster young gun. The problem is that we can't be sure that this will work, and that WOW would be winning races if it made those changes. Let's look at another example. This example is quite familiar as it involves a famous driver who retired last year. Almost 15 years ago, TripleEight Race Engineering were a new team that had shown speed, but had some serious reliability problems that held them back. They took a risk by swapping their two fast drivers, one of whom had delivered 2 podiums for the team, and replaced them with 2 drivers who simply needed faster cars and had done more with less. Boom, they were frontrunners. Then they replaced the less successful of the 2 drivers with a young gun who needed a faster car. This young gun became their star driver and is now the most successful driver of all time, and TripleEight are now the most successful team of all time. In this same sort of scenario, WOW would have to swap 2 drivers who have done a great job and put in 2 other drivers who needed better cars. The problem here is that WOW's cars are not fast at the moment, so it doesn't matter who's driving. In the DJR Team Penske example, it was not just a fast and successful driver that made the difference, but the engineer that was hired to lead the team's development. So WOW needs new drivers and a new technical director. That is why they are rumoured to be signing race winner Chaz Mostert and his engineer Adam DeBoer for the 2020 season. Around the same time that TripleEight became frontrunners, so did Full Performance Racing. What made them successful was signing the right people. It sounds simple, that getting the right people is all that you need to win, but in this case the team needed one person who was good at making teams fast. In 2005, FPR signed a race winner who had left every team that he'd driven for in a better state than they were when he first arrived. The cars were better, pit stops, everything was at a better standard, so when this driver joined FPR he did it again. Cars were now more reliable, and all that they needed was to make the cars faster. So, the team signed a young driver who needed a faster car, and this driver became their all-time greatest, but not the sport's all-time greatest. In WOW's case, there is no driver who is known for improving teams, so the case of FPR cannot be applied, unless maybe Todd Hazelwood, but it's early days for him, and the team he drives for is constantly improving. Erebus Motorsport are a good example of a team that has slowly built up into a front-running force. Their success has its origin in a major shift in 2016. They switched to Commodores, hired a driver fresh from a championship challenge, hired him a star engineer familiar with their equipment, and started going their own way in terms of developing their cars. The next year they built their own complete Commodore, hired an experienced driver to provide useful feedback, and won Bathurst. In 2018, they took another step forward with the new Commodore, a rookie driver, and were championship contenders early in the year. This year they struggled at the start, but have stabilised and are seen as one of the best Holden teams, beaten only by TripleEight on a regular basis. For WoW, hiring a driver fresh from a championship challenge is not a clear option. Mostert is the highest placed driver yet to sign a contract for 2020, in 5th at the moment. Another example of a successful team is Brad Jones Racing, which experienced a period of success from 2013 to 2016. Since then it has not been at the same level, but the legacy of its success in those years portrays the team as being competitive and arguably one of the best holding teams. The team did not have a driver change for 2013, but the team built its first Holden chassis with the car of the future and had been improving over the previous 5 years towards their success. It began with a switch from Ford to Holden in 2008, then signing a race winner known for improving teams, expanding to 3 cars, and then signing a younger driver who needed a faster car. The car of the future was almost a reset for teams in the category, and BJR managed to get the jump on everyone. They made a bigger improvement than every other team and were early title challengers. But over the course of the year, other teams caught up, and the teams that were usually up front returned to the front. BJR was still front runners with their strong driver lineup, and continued to do that for the next few years before the younger driver left for a better opportunity. He was replaced with a similarly experienced driver, but the team weren't quite where they were before. Then the team improver left, and was replaced with a younger and faster driver, and since then the team hasn't been at a race-winning level. WoW couldn't replicate the example of BJR. Well, they could, but it would be risky and almost unnecessary. It would require changing manufacturers, which is a goal for the team, but not one for next year. As I said before, the category doesn't have a team improving driver at the moment. WoW did run more than 2 cars in the past, but the obstacle is finding a sponsor for the whole year, and that was what led them to drop back to 2 cars. Having a 3rd car would provide more data for the team, but I'm not going to pretend that I know what WoW's actual problem is. For WoW to sign a driver who needs a faster car, they will probably do well by taking on Jack LeBrock, who has demonstrated his talent in a fast car, but has now fallen to the back of the grid. WoW could also sign Richie Stanaway or James Golding. Their team will lead the category at the end of the year, and both drivers have demonstrated that they can perform well in a good car. One example that is hard to understand is that of Garry Rogers Motorsport, which is currently going through a worse year than WoW. The example that I will use for WoW's return to the front is that of the Holdsworth-Caruso era. GRM had gone through a tough period after being title contenders in 2000, and went for a complete driver lineup change for 2006. They signed 2 young drivers, one who was a 2-time champion of the development series and had prior main game experience, and the other had shown significant improvement in the development series and impressed as an endurance driver for the team in 2005. The team improved over the next 2 years, and in 2008 the 2-time champion was dropped for another big improver in the development series. The team continued its improvement and then signed a star engineer for 2010. The team clicked and were regular top 10 qualifiers and race finishers. The only reason that the era came to a sudden end was because the team held back on upgrades in preparation for the car of the future in 2013. The team did return to the front when the car of the future launched, but it is hard to attribute the success to the team when one driver seemed to have all the success. WoW could certainly choose the GRM path back to glory, but there are plenty of good drivers in the current main game field without looking at the development series. At the moment, it would not be possible for WoW to replicate the GRM example, but let's try anyway. Brody Kostecki is the closest thing to the big improver, but there are no 2-time champions that are young enough to match GRM's 2006 lineup. Instead, WoW could sign Alex Rullo, who has had previous main game experience but has not won a championship in the development series. Not that it matters, because they will be replaced in order to fit the example. Then the team would have to sign a star engineer in 2024, which is too far in the future to predict for. Even then, the series is working on its next major regulations change for 2022, so there are just too many factors that are major unknowns in this scenario, but it's fun to think about it. After all of this consideration, the best path seems to be the GRM one. It probably won't kick the team into being a championship contender, but it might set them on the right path. Chopping and swapping drivers is my least favourite subject. I'd prefer that no drivers were replaced, but history shows that somebody new will replace somebody old, somebody not good enough, or somebody without the sponsorship dollars. Anyway, this was fun, and I can't wait to see what happens.